Thanks, Jorge, and thanks to all of you for joining the May 2018 webinar of the Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy. This 90-minute webinar is hosted by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to provide information and networking opportunities to governments, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders interested in sustainable materials management. Today's webinar also kicks off an international effort among the G7 countries, and that is Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom and the U.S. to facilitate an exchange of best practices and lessons learned in reducing food loss and waste as part of the G7 Alliance on Resource Efficiency. The G7 Alliance on Resource Efficiency was established in 2015 to serve as a forum to share knowledge and create information networks, including collaboration with businesses and other stakeholders to advance resource efficiency, promote best practices, and foster innovation. I would like to extend a special welcome to our international participants. In the United States, we estimate that almost 77 billion pounds of food waste were generated in 2014. Food makes up to 21% of municipal solid waste going to landfill. Producing, transporting, distributing, and discarding food that never gets eaten is a waste of natural resources, labor, and money. In September 2015, the U.S. EPA and the United States Department of Agriculture jointly announced a national goal to cut food loss and waste in half by 2030. This national goal has created a lot of energy, and we've seen incredible innovation across sectors to prevent, recover, and recycle food that would have otherwise been thrown away. The U.S. EPA's role is to provide information, data, and tools, share best practices, and foster collaborative partnerships. We engage stakeholders through voluntary incentive-based programs and public-private partnerships like the Food Recovery Challenge and the U.S. Food Loss and Waste 2030 Champions. We also act as a convener and have organized many events across the country, bringing players together from across the food system to share innovative approaches, lessons learned, and plans for reducing food loss and waste. Through a public-private partnership with a dozen other organizations, we launched Further with Food, Center for Food Loss and Waste Solutions, a platform for sharing food loss and waste solutions that we continue to build as a site to serve as the main hub of domestic information. And finally, we regularly publish a key report used to measure U.S. progress in waste reduction, Advancing Sustainable Materials Management, Facts and Figures, which provides a national picture of how much food waste is being generated, composted, combusted, and landfilled. We are working on expanding our food measurement methodology to fully capture all how food waste is generated and managed across all sectors. As a way of ramping up national efforts to meet the 2030 goal, in late 2016, EPA and USDA jointly announced the U.S. Food Loss and Waste 2030 Champions, which are businesses and organizations that have made a public commitment to reduce food loss and waste in their own operations by 50% by the year 2030. We currently have 21 businesses that have made this commitment. Today's webinar will feature presenters representing 3 2030 champions, ConAgra, Sodexo, and halve USA, which are leading the fight against food waste. They will discuss best practices, tools, and resources they developed and implemented to prevent food from going to waste, and will also address how shifts in company culture have changed operations, as well as the critical role measurement of food waste plays in achieving their goals. We will take 1 to 2 questions after each presentation, and we'll have a longer question and answer session at the conclusion of all 3 presentations. Feel free to type in questions throughout the webinar. So moving on to today's webinar, please note the disclaimer on your screen. And now on to our speakers. I have the pleasure of introducing our featured speakers. First up is Gail Taville, Vice President of R&D Sustainability, Nutrition, and Process Engineering at ConAgra Brands. She co-chairs Food Waste Reduction Alliance on behalf of Grocery Manufacturers Association members and chairs the policy committee. Gail is also an advocate for the packaging industry through Ameripen, an organization that proactively influences packaging policy in the U.S. For full bios on today's speakers, visit our Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy website. Gail, I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Kathleen, and thanks for the lead in here. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes kind of talking about why food waste is so important to ConAgra as a company, and then give a couple of case studies of where we've done some things to try to make an impact in our own business. So I'll just jump right in. So the first thing, I won't read this slide, but I'll leave it up here for just a minute, is just to think about our journey as a company. We've had a lot of changes over the last 5 or 6 years as we've evolved as a company, and we've come up with our corporate responsibility philosophy, which the key thing in this whole notion of responsibility, CSR, or environment, social governance, is around collaboration, and it's around building stronger communities, better planet, and being responsible as an organization all the way through our supply chain, from the farm all the way to the consumer experience, and then what they do with any materials left after that experience. So that's really about our corporate responsibility philosophy. And with that, we came into these 4 basic focus areas for how we focus our citizenship efforts. One is around better planet, which is really about energy consumption, water quality, all of those things that are integral to the impacts on the planet, both good and bad. Another area is around the food, which is making sure that we have safe, affordable, delicious food that consumers can fit into their healthy lifestyle, or whatever lifestyle they feel like they want to pursue. Responsible sourcing, which is really about how do we get the materials that we need to make the products that we put in the marketplace, from ingredients that are grown in the U.S. or globally, as well as packaging materials. And then stronger communities. That's really about the people that we operate with, our employees, the stakeholders in our communities, our suppliers and their employees, et cetera. So we've really got the planet, the food, how we source, and the people that are involved. And there's lots more information on all of this if anybody wants to read up on ConAgra citizenship. We publish a report every year, and that's available on our website, and there's a link in the deck. And so food, why is that so important to me personally and us as a company, is really, if I think about my role in sustainability over the years, I think of it as the 3-legged stool of environmental, social, and economic impact. And to me, food waste is one of those things that just nails all 3 of them if you do it poorly. And economically, the amount of food we waste is unsustainable in terms of the cost it takes on us as a company when we buy ingredients that don't make it into finished goods that are then sold at a profit. All those dollars that go into the ingredients that don't go into finished goods are a loss for us. And so that's a really important economic impact. Socially, we know we have a lot of Americans that are food insecure, yet we grow more than enough nutritious calories in the United States to feed everyone. And environmentally, it's really pretty obvious, all of the impacts that go into farming in terms of land use, water use, energy use, chemicals, et cetera. Every investment there that doesn't make it into the bellies of our citizens is a loss, as well as the which creates a really toxic methane gas that is really potent in our atmosphere. So all of the above benefit if we reduce food waste. So one thing that we did as a company is we publish a materiality matrix every year. And this slide takes a little bit of explanation in that we do a pretty substantial review internally and externally of things that are going on around us and that are related to citizenship, sustainability, CSR. And we refreshed it this last year as the company has made a bunch of evolutions. And one of the things that really hit the kind of middle of our chart is food waste as its own topic. So what we do is every couple of years, we look at all of the topics that are really gaining traction in the social domain and media, et cetera, that are material to our business, and we plot them. We plot them in terms of importance to external stakeholders as well as importance to us as a business entity. And you can see there that food waste came out in this last assessment as its own topic of interest, and it came out pretty high in terms of importance. So that's one of the reasons that we're spending a lot of time on it at ConAgra. And so, as Kathleen mentioned, we eagerly signed on to the 2030 Champions when we found out about that program getting launched. And we've been using the EPA food waste hierarchy for many years. We adopted it probably 5 or 6 years ago as sort of our official roadmap internally to help educate our internal stakeholders on how to think about the byproducts that we create when we do food manufacturing. If you think about how you prepare food in your kitchen, where you have peel waste or things that are damaged, or plate waste when your serving size is too big or somebody didn't like their broccoli, those things all end up happening at a food manufacturer as well, but they do it at scale. So when you do it at home, you may end up with a half a pound of food scraps after you have prepared a dinner. When we do it, when we're creating single-serve frozen meals, for example, it can be thousands of pounds a day. And so when we think about how do we handle those things at scale, we really look to this hierarchy to help us influence how can we move up the value chain from, the last possible resort would be landfilling if we can't source reduce it, meaning not make the byproduct at all, or if we can't keep it clean enough to donate, how can we really make sure that we're making those smart decisions everywhere along the loss chain so that we can control those materials. And so we've educated our plant employees on what this hierarchy is and how to pull levers internally to move up the value chain, if you will. The one thing I wanted to touch on just a little bit is, Kathleen mentioned in my bio that I'm very engaged in the Food Waste Reduction Alliance. And a few years ago, we did a publication where we looked at where the wastes are in the manufacturing industry and what we do with them as an industry. We did an assessment survey. We've done a couple of them, but this is the most recent. And one of the things that I thought would be interesting to share here is that if you think about the number of pounds, 1 billion pounds that's generated, and what food manufacturers as a policy do to handle those materials, a lot of it ends up going to animal feed, because as I mentioned before, we have such scale, we're able to aggregate those materials, and then we often work either directly with farmers or through third-party handlers that convert some of our byproducts into an animal feed product aggregated with other materials. And as you can see, very little of it actually goes into landfill from a food manufacturer, which is good news. Some of the opportunities, though, that we've found from our survey is source reduction is obviously the biggest opportunity, not creating a waste or a byproduct in the first place. Donating things in a non-traditional way, and what I mean by that is food producers have been donating food in packaged goods for decades. There's the whole network of food recovery through donation around food banks, and Feeding America and other such agencies have relied on lightly damaged, short shelf life, discontinued things in packaged goods forever. But finding ways to donate bulk materials that would otherwise go to animal feed, composting, or even worse, a landfill, there are many opportunities that we have in our systems to segregate some of those byproducts that are perfectly edible, safe, and delicious, but just hadn't been thought of taking care in that way. And I have an example I'll share with you. And then energy recovery. That one is also an underutilized opportunity for those of us with scale who could do things like fermentation to biofuels or anaerobic digestion. And just, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but this is just a resource that people can use that the FWRA put out and continues to update and keep current with new case studies. And you can find a copy of this and other publications to download at the website on the screen. So now getting into the fun stuff. I have a couple of examples I just wanted to share for inspiration around how to not create waste in the first place. This is one of my favorite examples. We make shelf-stable pudding at a plant in Waterloo, Iowa. We actually have 2 plants, one in Menominee, Wisconsin as well. But our Waterloo, Iowa plant came up with a really creative idea a couple of years ago. They noticed that ever since we started making shelf-stable pudding, which is an aseptic process, which basically means it's sterile. It's a sterile environment. So when you go from one flavor to another, you can't just open up the line and drum off any excess pudding that might happen to be in the line, because if you were to do that, you would break sterility on the line, and you would have to do a full clean, which takes an 8-hour cycle on an aseptic line. And so what we did ever since we started making pudding in plastic cups is you would just push so many cycles through the machine until the next flavor came through. And all the pudding cups that were made between those flavor changes ended up in a dumpster because they weren't saleable goods. You had to have the next flavor come through clean without any blending of the pudding and the piping. So for many years, those went to the landfill because once they were in the package, there was no way to separate the packaging from the food. A few years ago, we were really proud of ourselves. We found a company who was able to crush them, depackage them, and recycle the plastic cups and convert the pudding into an ingredient for animal feed. So we thought we'd solved the problem. Until one day, one of the folks at the plant said, if we just scheduled this better, we make multi-flavored pudding in layers. If we just scheduled it better, couldn't we put some combinations together that would actually taste good, but be sort of a mystery flavor, and then sell those in a down market? And everybody said they were crazy and they couldn't do it, and there was a lot of reasons why. But they kept pursuing it. They kept after it. And then lo and behold, we found out if we put them in a very generic package, we put all of the ingredients that we could possibly end up in this product. There's a prison down the street that we had consistently sold first grade pudding to, but they didn't want to buy it from us because it was kind of too expensive. And pudding, since it's a good source of calcium, is actually a fairly sought after dessert cup. And so they came up with a deal with the prison to sell a blended kind of mystery flavor pudding at cost for us to produce it, but that was a total reduction in waste. So this plant went from producing 8 cycles of pudding cups between every changeover of flavor to a zero waste facility. So really interesting way of dealing with a problem. Another example of source reduction is we have a plant in Council Bluffs, Iowa that makes, and in addition to other things, makes pot pies. And they found that every day when they were creating the pot pie, the dough on the top, they had a whole bunch of trim dough on the outside edges. And so they said, we have so much of this that just ends up in a tub that goes to animal feed. How can we produce less of it? And they realized all they needed to do to create a big reduction in waste on the line was to put little spacers on the line and reduce the trim on each side by ½ an inch. And that was a really small change. It cost about $200. I think on the picture you can maybe see the little white spacers on the line. Saved 60% of their dough waste and a fairly significant cost savings as well. This is another example that of a project that we did several years ago. There was a collaboration with Forgotten Harvest, which is a food rescue organization in the Detroit area. We had been dealing with pieces of Slim Jim meat snacks that we had been landfilling for many years. Because when you buy a Slim Jim, and hopefully lots of you buy Slim Jims, when you buy them, they have nice clean cuts on the ends. But if anybody's ever made sausage, you know that sausage is made in a tube that has, you know, a twisted end. And so we have to cut those ends off. And because of the way that the product is smoked and dried, we can't really rework very much of it into new food. So a lot of these trim scraps were going to landfill. And so through a very collaborative project with Forgotten Harvest, we decided to test would their agencies and the people they served be interested in having slightly imperfect meat snacks. I've been about a year, but the last time I was at SO, it's the most sought after thing in their mobile food pantries, and they'll take as many as they can get. And since 2012, when we started this program, just about 5 million pounds pretty much every Friday to pick up a batch. And then just a couple others on donation. Hard for some of agencies to take because they're such large containers. Unless they have repacking operations and large freezers, they're not able to handle them. So we worked with the local food bank to help them develop some capacity to be able to take large volumes of these frozen ingredients, repack them, and distribute them to their agencies. And then I'm just going to go through a couple of these quickly. Separated and cleaned. We had some materials that were packaged in cans that we had trouble dealing with, that we were able to partner with a competitor, actually, that was working with a digester a few miles down the road, and we were able to depackage the cans and send the product to the digester and then recycle the cans. Unfortunately, I have to also disclose that that digester is not operational at the moment, and we've been having conversations with that same competitor on how do we get that program going again. So those are the examples I had for you, and I just want to leave you with just a thought about how food manufacturers play a role in food waste at all ends of the spectrum. And one is preservation and packaging, even though they often get some negative press in terms of processed foods, I would call them prepared foods, and we just prepare them at scale. And when we prepare foods through preservation techniques like canning, freezing, aseptic processing for things like shelf-stable pudding that I mentioned earlier, those things that they really help extend a shelf life, and they help foods be ready and able for people to use when they want them, where they want them, and at the quality they want. And so I would just leave you with those thoughts about how food manufacturers sort of help manage the food supply chain and waste in a proactive way, just by nature of what we do. And I think that was my last slide. So I could take a couple questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Gail. So as we mentioned, we're going to take a couple questions now, and then we'll have more time for questions at the end. And so we've had a number of questions come in, so thank you all for that. So I'll start with one of those. So on one of your slides, Gail, you show manufacturers that are recycling food waste into fertilizer and compost. Can you explain what is the difference between fertilizer and compost in recycling food waste?
Sure. So we put compost and land application sort of in the same bucket because they fill the same basic need. Some places where we have wastewater sludge, we actually direct apply that material on certain farmers' fields, obviously in conjunction with the farmer, because the wastewater sludge is so rich in nutrients that it doesn't need to be further processed. In other cases where there's more solids in the materials, they actually need to go through the step of composting through an actual composting, whether it's active or passive composting. So it just depends on what the material is, whether it would be suitable for direct land application or has to go through that further step of composting.
Great, thank you. And next question, can you just talk a little bit about what's next for the Food Waste Reduction Alliance?
Sure. So the SWRA has been doing a lot of work around trying to figure out sector-specific next steps. The Alliance is made up of food manufacturers, retailers, and restaurants. And so we spent the first number of years finding things that collectively we could make a difference and influence and develop best practices and really amplify the message of why tackling food waste is so important. We sort of go further than that and make progress within our industries. We need to focus on each sector specifically because the issues are different now.
Great, thank you, Gail. Okay, so we're going to move on now, but waste reduction throughout Sodexo's 13,000 sites in North America. And thank you. Now, you can go ahead and we'll do
key programs and collaborations that we're focused on to really move the needle and eliminate our food waste. So first, to give you a little bit of, I'm really blessed to work at Sodexo because we really have a strong level of senior leadership buy-in. Both the chair of our board, Sophie Balan, and our global CEO, Denis, are both huge supporters of corporate responsibility and are really focused on our food waste. When we think of corporate responsibility at Sodexo, we really think about the roles that we play and the impacts that we have. So we have 3 roles and 3 impacts. We put those together to make our Better Tomorrow 2025 matrix. Our impacts are on individuals, communities, and the environment. And our role is as an employer, a service provider, and a corporate citizen. So we chose our roles because of the kind of impact, because of the scope that we have. So we employ a ton of people. We provide services at a lot of locations to a lot of clients. And because of our size and scope, we have a responsibility to be a good corporate citizen. So on the right side, all of our environmental impacts, food waste is really built into all of those, how we train our employees. Carbon emissions do encompass our food waste due to methane emissions from landfills. And then down at the corporate citizen level, championing sustainable resource usage, that's really focused on delivering on Champions 12.3 and driving thought leadership around food waste. We can't do this alone. We have a lot of partners that we work with. We are also part of the Food Waste Reduction Alliance. It's a really valuable group doing a lot of really great work. And then we also receive a lot of awards every year for the work that we do. We're top in our industry for sustainability every year on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index and Rebecca Sam. So I guess the hard work is paying off. We have 3 priorities that align with those impact areas. That's gender, hunger, and waste. Food waste really for Sodexo is a nexus issue. I think Gail talked about this as well. It's a way that you can impact a lot of different areas and have a positive impact or a very negative impact if you do it poorly, both on communities and on the environment. So food waste and addressing food waste in our operations really helps to speak to both the hunger and the waste priority areas, but really we're focused on the waste priority area. I mean, the hunger area is very, very important too, and we address it through our food recovery efforts, which I'll talk about. But really we do a lot more than food recovery to feed hungry people. We have a huge impact on addressing hunger globally, and it goes far, far beyond our food recovery efforts. So now I'm going to go through briefly our global waste strategy. So we have a 5-tiered strategy to try and address material and organic waste at our account. So material being plastic, metal, and organic being food waste or landscaping. So the first up there is collaboration. I think this one's key. So Sodexo is a partner with all of our clients. So we are a guest in their homes. We come into their facilities. We hire people. We operate using their machinery and make food for their employees or students or patients. So really, we can't do anything alone. We have to do everything in collaboration with our clients, but also with our partners like World Wildlife Federation and the EPA. So collaboration is key for us. And then we want to think about how are we developing our strategy and having a strategy to address food waste at our accounts, and how are we driving operational excellence. We definitely want to change consumer and client behavior. So because we are always in collaboration with our clients and we really can't do anything alone, it presents some challenges, but I think it's way more exciting than that because we're amplifying our impact. So when we make a change at a client site and we do that in collaboration with our client, we drive change for that client and how they do business. So we're building in some of these corporate responsibility strategies and priorities into how those clients do business and helping to bring them along in cases where maybe they haven't prioritized these issues. We also know that a lot touch so many people every day. To change those, we want to tell the story of what we're doing and talk about it so that we keep this issue in the news and keep it relevant, and also share best practices on how we can drive our whole industry forward. And then you can't manage what you don't measure, so we are very focused on finding ways to measure our impact, though because of the way we do business, that is challenging certainly, but is something that we're always looking at new ways to measure those impacts and report out so that we can actually drive the right behaviors. We're really focused on implementing circular economy principles at our accounts. This is a philosophy that's been adopted by a lot of manufacturing companies, really focused on creating products that can be broken down, recycled, reused, rebuilt, so that nothing is ever going to go to landfill, but everything can be put back into the system. So we're trying to build our service offerings with this model in mind. And really what this is about is viewing waste as a resource and focusing on operational efficiency. So if we consider anything that we typically send to landfill or compost or recycling to be a resource, what's the highest use of that resource? It's not very efficient and not very sustainable to be paying to haul off resources that could be used in one way or another. Because of our business model, we also definitely use the EPA food recovery hierarchy. It's our guiding light. But because we are limited in making kind of unilateral decisions at our account, we always have to work in collaboration. We're very focused on the top two tiers of the EPA's food recovery hierarchy. So that's source reduction. Again, a perfectly efficient location would not be sending anything to landfill, would not be sending resources to landfill. And then feeding hungry people. We were highlighted by ReFed in their food service action guide for our food recovery toolkit that makes it very simple for our on-site teams to donate food. And we recovered, so took food that we had prepared that was nutritious, that was delicious, that would have gone to landfill because no one ate it that day at the hospital where we're working or the college campus. And we send that to a local feeding organization in the communities where we operate. And we did that with over almost 1 million pounds of food last year, which is really exciting and we're really proud of it. But as I said, our food recovery efforts and our efforts to stop hunger and eliminate hunger in the communities where we operate go far beyond just food recovery. So what are we doing to actually meet these goals? There are 3 main programs that we have that I'm going to highlight today. We're doing a lot more than this. We're always looking for ways to collaborate with external partners and our clients. We're really trying to drive innovation and find new and different ways to drive down these numbers and address kind of the hard to reach categories of food loss and waste as well as material waste. But first I'm going to talk about WasteWatch powered by LeanPath. So WasteWatch powered by LeanPath is Sodexo's kind of proprietary, customized waste diversion program. So because we operate in so many different zip codes and geographies, working with different types of clients who have different types of waste streams, there's never a one-size-fits-all solution. So we have to create custom solutions in collaboration with our clients to drive down landfill waste and increase recycling, decrease food waste. One of the technologies we're using to drive that program is the Lean Path technology. This is a very popular technology right now, and it's very simple. We actually are working on a really large-scale deployment right now in North America across all of our segments, and we've been doing large phase 1 deployments over the past 12 months here in North America in our corporate services and university segments. But we've been deploying this technology for the past 10 years, and now are really picking up the pace. It's a very simple technology. You take, let's say, trim waste when you're prepping for a salad bar. You take it over to a scale, you weigh it, you categorize it as fruit and vegetable waste. You say it came from the prep station for the salad bar. You say who you are. That information is uploaded to the cloud. And let's say we have an employee that's throwing away a whole fillet, and it's $75 worth of meat. That can actually even be texted to our chef on site, and they can go, hold on, wait. Do not throw away that fillet. We want to use that. There's a place for it. We can find a use for that. So that data is used to drive reporting and interventions, provide information on training. So we probably should talk to Mary Beth. We have a lot of prep waste. Maybe we need to work on knife skills. So it really gives targeted training to drive down that food loss and waste. And in 9 pilot studies that we've done in NORAN, and we've done, I think, 15 internationally, we've seen a consistent reduction in food loss of 50% back of house when we deploy this program. So what the food waste that we have control over, we see being driven down 50%. It's a little less than that if you're looking at post-consumer, but it does allow us to right-size portions, which can help us drive down that post-consumer number. But we're really excited that this program aligns so perfectly with Champions 12.3. So this data that's uploaded to the cloud, there's a lot of detailed reporting. We are using this reporting at a senior level to drive the way that we do business. So if we find that we're really just not selling lima beans, should we be menuing lima beans? If we find that our top waste category in North America is chicken, what can we do to reduce that waste through our national culinary team? So it really helps us drive decision-making at the account level, but also at a corporate level across the US and Canada by using this granular data for informed decision-making by our senior leadership. Next, we're going to talk about Wasteless Week. Wasteless Week is a great, I wouldn't call it, I guess it's a program that we do every October. This year, it's the 22nd through 26th. And it's really targeted at reducing waste in a number of categories. So organic and material waste, but also wasting energy and wasting water. Obviously, because it's such a priority for us right now to reduce material and organic waste, we've focused a lot over the past couple years on implementing trainings, doing Weigh the Waste campaigns, which is where you go into the dining facility, into the cafe or the cafeteria, and have consumers, employees, patients, customers weigh their plate waste so they can be aware of the total amount of food being wasted by them, but also by their whole community. So this is just a week where we really focus on training our employees, empowering them to talk about these issues with consumers and their clients, and try and really change behavior long term. We've been doing this program since 2012. So it's been going on for a long time, and it really helps us just to drive that awareness and highlight these challenges every year on a regular basis and allow our teams to engage with those clients and consumers. Lastly, we're going to talk about the International Food Waste Coalition. This is much higher level. I know that a lot of people on this webinar are probably looking for tactical interventions to reduce food waste at their accounts. This is really that high-level thought leadership piece. So focusing on driving change in our industry, but also across our value chain. So from farm to fork to drive down food waste. The first program this group took on was addressing pre and post-consumer food waste in schools, because we know that when we work with young people, they bring those values back to their parents, and they also turn into adults who are aware of these issues. So we chose K-12 schools in Italy, the UK, and France to push this program out. We obviously are working with a lot of other partners on these materials, but I think the school program, SKOOL, is really exciting because it gives materials and support for anyone in a school to drive change by engaging with students, the administration, teachers, and the dining services. So it provides activity guides on how to do back of house kitchen tours with students, how to do a way to waste program. There are, I think, 5 categories of curriculum for teachers to use to teach about food loss and waste, why it's important, and what students can do about it, that are very extensive and very detailed. And then there's also advertising material and all kinds of resources that can be used. Oh, and also there's resources actually that on-site teams or administrators can use to actually try and collaborate with their value chain and their suppliers to drive down waste as well. So it's just a very detailed, very granular program that we're really proud to have been a part of globally. And there's, if you Google the International Food Waste Coalition, you can find the report. And from my understanding, all the materials are available if you just contact the organization. So if you need the curriculum, you'd like the posters, I really like the posters. I think they're modern, but also accessible for all age groups in a K-12 school. I believe that they're available and they can send you those documents. And that's all I have today. I think I have time for a couple questions.
That's right. Thank you, Nell. So again, a couple questions, which again, thanks everyone for keeping them coming. So Nell, can you tell us a little bit about how you're working with EPA's Food Recovery Challenge?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're working with the EPA Food Recovery Challenge in a number of ways. We're actually trying to standardize and push data from our internal systems to the EPA Food Recovery Challenge, and then so it's easier for our on-site teams. Our on-site teams have a lot on their plates, and so asking them to go to a number of systems to input the results of something that's already additional to their day-to-day, which is food recovery or composting, is a pretty big ask. So we're actually collaborating to push that data to the EPA and then allow those on-site teams to utilize the reporting and the goal setting to drive change at their accounts. And then we also talk about it a lot. It's one of the standard ways that we actually track our food recovery and our composting. It's one of the best sources of data that we can use to pull those numbers from our accounts, because we don't hold a contract with those composters. Our clients generally do. So being able to get that data is incredibly valuable for us.
That's great to hear. Okay, so second question, what resources or best practices would you recommend for communicating with businesses, the small businesses, right? The importance of food waste reduction and or recycling. Is there any resources out there?
Yeah, so I think that ReFed has some really good resources, but I always use EPA resources. The EPA has a lot of extensive, detailed guides and checklists. You can find a lot of stuff on the EPA website that can help communicate this issue to people that maybe don't understand it as of yet. I don't know, I guess the goal of working with small businesses may be to inform and just explain the problem. And I think that both ReFed and the EPA have resources that really outline why this is should be a focus for anyone that's working in food.
All right, well, thank you, Nell, and appreciate that feedback on our resources. Okay, so we're now going to turn our presentation over to Christine Gallagher, who's the Manager of Environmental Sustainability for Retail Business Services, LLC at Ahold Delhaize, USA. So Christine, please go ahead.
Hi, Kathleen. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for this session. So again, I'm Christine Gallagher, Manager of Environmental Sustainability for Retail Business Services, otherwise known as RBS, an Ahold Delhaize U.S. company. And today I want to share with you information on our Stop and Shop brand's green energy facility, which is a significant component of their overall waste diversion strategy, as well as a bit about the unique in-store food waste diversion process this entails. But before we look at this, I will give you a better idea of who we are. So Ahold Delhaize is a world-leading food retailer with over 6,600 locations worldwide and 369,000 people, serving over 50 million satisfied customers a week. RBS is the support organization for Ahold Delhaize US, and our brands in the United States are Stop and Shop, Food Lion, Hannaford, Giant Martin's, Giant Food, and Peapod. The U.S. is Ahold Delhaize's biggest market segment, generating revenue in 2017 of more than $43 billion. To give an overall perspective of some of Stop and Shop's sustainability initiatives, this year's Earth Day poster provides a good snapshot. These programs address hunger relief, sustainable product sourcing, and environmental impact. What this poster does not show is the additional store-level waste diversion programs going on, such as recycling of wax cardboard, film plastics, including plastic bags and film brought back from customers, metal and wood. We recycle used cooking oil, we do meat rendering, and we recycle rigid plastics in certain locations, such as pharmacy bottles and buckets and pails from our deli and bake shops. So currently in Stop and Shop, 73% of all waste generated is either reused or recycled. And so now I want to talk about the Green Energy Facility. And taking a closer look, Green Energy Facility is simply our public name for what is simply an anaerobic digester, which we know doesn't sound too enticing to most people, which is why we decided to brand it as we have and call it the Green Energy Facility. So for those of you who may not be familiar with an anaerobic digester, the infographic on the left should be helpful. The way it works is food from 208 Stop and Shop locations that is not sold or donated is collected at store level, and this food is still in its packaging. It is placed into specialized bins, collection bins, that are shown here on the right. These bins are transported via reverse logistics back to the facility where this is located, which means our trucks that are delivering product to our stores on a given day are now taking these bins back to the Green Energy Facility, along with other recyclable materials that I mentioned earlier, like cardboard and plastic. Once at the facility, the bins are emptied into a blending system that separates out the packaging material and liquefies the food. This is where the anaerobic digestion starts. The food material is placed in an oxygen-free tank filled with microbes that break down the food, excuse me, producing odorless gas. This biogas is sent to a generator where it is transformed into electricity. So this slide shows a little more detail about the actual in-store collection process. This is much improved compared to the process Stop and Shop used to have, which consisted of associates having to haul containers of food waste outside the back of the store, then dumping them into covered 3-yard containers. With this approach, they don't have to depackage the food waste. They don't have to go outside and deal with weather and pests. They spend more time in the store taking care of customers. In addition, these bins are tracked via an RFID technology, which enables us to give stores reporting on their recycling levels and unsold food, and we're able to give them accurate credit for their diversion efforts. And we also know who isn't diverting what they should. So at this point, I want to remind everyone that Ahold Delhaize is a food retailer. We sell groceries. So we know nothing about operating a facility such as this, which is why we have a really great partner who created and operates this facility for us. Their name is Divert, and they are based in Massachusetts, and they're a clean technology company dedicated to reducing waste. I wanted to give an insight into what our guidelines look like for associates about what can and cannot go into the facility, into the process. But most importantly, what we stress to associates is that anything that can be donated does not go in the bin. So we have a program to donate meat called Meet the Needs and other various donation programs that we follow. But we constantly urge and direct stores to follow their donation programs first and foremost wherever possible. So looking at the slide, it shows the wide variety of material that can be placed in the system, including frozen foods, which is really helpful because in the past this used to go into the compactor. What we don't want is anything that can either damage the system or anything that gets a, quote, what I call a free ride, which means anything like trash or packaging that does not contain organic material. The bugs don't like that. A few facts about the green energy facility. It takes unsold food from 208 Stop and Shop stores and can process up to 130 tons of food waste daily. It is capable of providing up to 40% of our 1.1 million square foot distribution center's energy needs. And I should mention, this is located adjacent to our Freetown, Massachusetts distribution center that supports our Stop and Shop stores. And it's capable of producing up to 1.25 megawatts of clean electricity. So since its opening in early 2016, the Green Energy Facility has processed over 52,000 tons of material that would have otherwise gone to landfill. And it has produced enough energy to run over 1,040 U.S. homes for a year. And that concludes my presentation today on turning food waste into energy. And I'll be happy to take a question.
Great, thank you, Christine.
Sure.
So a couple of questions, a lot around your green energy facility, but the first one is, how is the digestate from the food recovery green energy facility used?
The digestate is utilized in the system to create the energy itself. It isn't sent anyplace else. It's the slurry that's created goes to a tank where the microbes, the bugs, if you will, consume it, and they emit a biogas, and that biogas is directed to a GE Urolocker, I think it's called, generator for those who are interested, and then the generator produces electricity, which is sent to the grid.
Oh, okay. So there's no kind of compost or material after that process is finished?
There is actually, there is a compost, we refer to a compost cake that is trucked off and utilized in further treatment and fertilization processing, I believe.
Okay, great, thank you. And then, sorry, just give us a second here. We're just trying to organize some of the many questions coming in. So you described the one green energy facilities. Do you have other ones across the country? And if so, where, or are others planned?
Yeah, so we actually, one of our other U.S. brands, Giant Martin Center, they're in central PA. They actually enjoy the same in-store process using the same bins and reverse logistics, except the facility to which these bins are sent that we do not own. So our vendor partner Divert builds the front end of the system in a warehouse close to our distribution center down there, and where the food material is processed up to the point of making the slurry, and then that slurry is trucked off to local digesters in the area. So Giant Martin's gets the benefit of diverting the unsold inedible food from going into their compactors, still in its packaging, so their associates don't have to depackage it. And then the local digesters benefit from turning the food material into clean energy and compost, et cetera. So it's a win-win situation down there, yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, so that concludes our three presentations, and we're going to open it up to questions for all three presenters. So we've been trying to compile and organize your questions here. So I'll try to, where it makes sense, identify who the question's going to, or if it's to all three of you. So first one, Nell. Folks are wanting to know how they can learn more about the school program and other information specific to your school food and recovery initiatives.
Yeah, so it's not only ours. It was made in collaboration with a number of corporate and nonprofit partners. But if you just go and to your favorite search engine, input the International Food Waste Coalition, and on their media page, you'll see the school program report, and you can download that there. I believe the materials are available on request. You'll have to email one of the people on their contact page for that.
Great, thank you. And a question for Gail. Are there regulations, limitations on what foods can be considered animal food? And where do you draw the line with food diversion when it comes to feeding animals?
Sure, yeah, there are regulations. Actually, there are state regulations that limit some things that can go direct to animal feed. And there's also a rule that was recently implemented related to the Food Safety Modernization Act called the Preventative Control Rule for Animal Feed. It doesn't limit what can go, but it does provide a framework for what best practices are required to assure a level of food safety and cleanliness for what goes to animal feed. A lot of that can be mitigated by food manufacturers when they use a third party to further process by aggregating with other feedstocks from other sources. So it's important to, I think, basically use best practices as a rule, but there's information on FSMA's animal control rule, and every plant should look at their state requirements. Some are more stringent than others.
Great, thank you. So Christine, other than depackaging, are there any other pre-treatments prior to food waste going into the digester?
No. I know some water from the system is used, but there's no other pre-treatment that I'm aware of.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Nell, can you, how has Sodexo ensured that all employees use the Waste Watch system all the time?
So if we're talking about the Waste Watch powered by LeanPath system, it's for the sites that have rolled it out, and again, we have not rolled out to 100% of our accounts yet. We're rolling out to key accounts right now, and we have a plan to have it be universal all applicable accounts, so not our convenience stores where it really doesn't make sense, maybe some franchises like Starbucks where it doesn't make sense, but there's actually a reporting that comes from the platform. So if the number of measurements per day drops or somebody stops tracking, there's actually a compliance report that can help us tell a number of indicators if maybe the data has been compromised in one way or another, aka people have stopped measuring. So that's definitely built into some of the KPIs that we're tracking at a high level and reporting out to our senior leadership.
Great, thank you. Next question is for Christine. You mentioned a Massachusetts partner, is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, what's the name? Someone was wanting to know the name and if meat can be included.
Yes, so their name is Divert, Inc. They used to be Feed Resource Recovery, but they've since rebranded. So Feed, Divert, as D-I-V-E-R-T. And I think they're in Concord, Massachusetts.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, next question is for Nell. So sorry, these are coming in quickly, so they're not necessarily organized around a theme, but we're trying to get to as many as we can. So Nell, can you tell the story about how LeanPath has worked well in a particular instance, including costs and benefits?
Yeah, so we have a number of pilot studies we've done going back to 2007. And I mean, they're all good stories, I guess. We have a number of case studies that we use. I think that anecdotally, this is just from a site visit I did recently. So Obviously, with this type of technology, when people become aware of food loss and the impact it has on their community and on the world, people tend to change their behavior pretty quick, especially when it comes to how they perform their job responsibilities in a kitchen. We know that chefs and culinarians are always our biggest advocates for this type of program. If they have any professional culinary training, this is built, it's part of their DNA, and something they do every day is look for ways to utilize scraps. But one story that I really liked was going over to one of our clients in DC, very high security, very nice corporate environment in DC, and talking to the on-site manager there, and they were getting their program up and running, and he was saying, you know, I've been looking at our numbers, and our chef has really embraced this and is really loving this program. And I think that before we even set our baseline, it takes about a month to get everybody measuring and say, okay, we are wasting about this much. They had not set that baseline yet, and he said, I think we've reduced our food costs by 2% already. So our raw material purchases, looking at our numbers this year over last year, I'm seeing a reduction of what I would think is about 2%. So, and that's a significant amount of food that was quickly eliminated. And so any savings they have since they set their baseline are actually, that baseline is, you know, about 4% lower than it was before. So that's really exciting. That's just one anecdote, but it really, we see consistent success with the Lean Pass technology at a variety of account types: healthcare, universities, corporate services, et cetera.
Great, thank you. So we have gotten a bunch of questions about packaging and food and kind of the nexus between the two. And we, you know, I'll just start with EPA. I mean, we recognize kind of the challenges there, both the role packaging plays in conserving food, but also the impacts of a lot of packaging when you're doing smaller portions and such. So maybe we can just, I think this touches all of you, maybe we can just go in order, Gail, Nell, and Christine, to talk about kind of how any innovations or ideas you have with respect to the packaging food nexus, and both kind of how you've used it to decrease food waste, but also maybe what you're trying to do to minimize the use of plastics or to get towards sustainable packaging. So Gail, do you want to start?
Sure. So the first thing I'd like to say is, and totally understand the worry about when you are finished with a packaged food product, what do you do with the package at the end? So we've spent a lot of time working with groups like AmeriPen and others to help develop points of view and policy conversations around recovery of used packaging. And that is a challenge that goes far beyond recycling in terms of other techniques for recovery, things like recovery for energy that's not incineration. I think that's a real important infrastructure question around packaging, whether they're compostable or you can create biogas out of used packaging. We have to have a better infrastructure in this country to collect packaging that has served its useful life. We also have done a lot of work on life cycle modeling and life cycle assessments, and we have noted very clearly that packaging and transportation combined are less than 10% of the total life cycle impact of a packaged food product, given that the vast majority of the environmental investment in food comes from agriculture, which isn't to say that we don't care about packaging. We do. It's very important to us, and we strive for using renewable resources where we can, making sure that we have an end-of-life scenario that's viable, or having a really good reason why we don't. We're labeling every food that we make with a how to recycle label. Whether it's recyclable or not, we want people to have education on what the after-use impacts are. And so we're being very deliberate about disclosing that on pack. And so packaging is a really important part of our business because it's how we, make sure that the food gets to the consumer safely and without spillage, spoilage, or damage. And so it's something we spend a lot of time working on.
Great, thanks, Gail. Nell, your thoughts?
Yeah, so at Sodexo, we obviously have a lot of packaging coming from our suppliers, but I think more relevant for this audience is really the packaging we use to serve our food. That's the way that most people interact with our packaging, is getting a plastic clamshell or a reusable china plate in our facilities. So as Gail alluded to, infrastructure in the US is very spotty. So what can be recycled where is different, what can be composted in different areas is different. So an example I'd like to use is that we do food service for a large nature magazine that's based in DC, and we had to have our landfiller, our composter, and our recycler in one room to find out that our corn plastic cups that are supposed to be compostable, or the on-site team thought that they should be, were going from the composter, being sent to the recycler who could not recycle them, and being sent to the landfill. So what we try and do is educate and empower our on-site teams to problem solve this in collaboration with their haulers. We're doing a 6-part series and creating, we actually have resources that we're updating for our on-site teams so they can understand what's the best material to use. Because in our case, as many people say, we want to see you using compostable to go where. And that may not be the best environmental or social choice, in my opinion, for our on-site teams. If you have a compostable bowl, but a plastic clamshell to take hot food in, I think it can be confusing for consumers, and that compostable is going to go to landfill because it can't be recycled. So it'd be best to use a recyclable product if it can be recycled in your area. The best option for sites that are not doing front of house composting are generally recycled, so like secondary materials, if possible, for their to-go container. So I think it's this kind of complicated question of the best mix of disposables for our on-site teams based on the infrastructure. I wish that that story was simpler and I could say, here, do X, Y, Z, check the checklist off and this, you'll be done. But the reality of our waste infrastructure in the US is just a little bit too complicated to allow for that. So we're really working to make it easier for our on-site teams to problem solve that and kind of work through that decision tree in collaboration with their client.
Great, thank you. And then finally, Christine?
So being a food retailer, a grocer, you know we're at the end of the line for product from suppliers. So we talk to and are working with suppliers around packaging, but we do have an own brands entity where we have potentially more impact, and we're at the stage where we're working on looking at a plastics reduction commitment of some sort. We're actually starting to work on figuring out our strategy and goals for our 2025 future view, and figuring out what those commitments look like. We know it's a problem. We know it's an issue. We have packaging engineers on our own brands team, on our private label team, working with our manager of product sustainability and wellness that works on our sustainability team to determine what those opportunities are. So we are looking at that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I guess just to reinforce, we at EPA, we are definitely looking at this nexus, and we have, in addition to our food loss and waste efforts, have a sustainable packaging effort that we're starting, and I think you guys have really laid out some of the complicated nature of the U.S. infrastructure, and it's really kind of definitely an opportunity for more work and collaboration. Okay, so we have a few more specific questions that have come in. And so this one is for Christine. So this came from someone who works at a food bank, and they're looking into anaerobic digestion for their food waste. And they would like to know how they can get a better understanding of the best practices for an on-site unit. So what tips do you have for them?
On-site unit for their facility. I mean, I know of there are smaller scale units that require the packaging, but there are smaller scale units that I'm aware of that could turn material into compost on site. One of the universities in Boston has one, and we went to view that. It has its challenges, as you can imagine, but the material would need to be depackaged and processed in that facility. I know of another facility or on-site processor that I believe turns the food waste into pellets that I think can be used as animal feed. I mean, our facility is 12,000 square feet, so we're on a much larger scale. So I don't know if they're looking at that size, if they would have that much volume. So it depends on the scope and scale that they're looking at. Sorry, I feel like I could have answered that better.
No, and I'll just add to that. Thank you. No, I think that was good, but I would just add to the person who asked the question. You know, I really encourage you to look at local resources, because kind of that's, I think, most going to inform what's available to you, and you may find where there are facilities that have anaerobic digesters you may be able to visit or discuss with them kind of some of the local conditions for doing anaerobic digestion. So I would definitely encourage looking locally.
Yeah, just to add to that, Kathleen, we are working with our local EPA to expand our permit for the facility, and one of the interested parties is a local food bank. So we would use the same sort of system and take back their food waste as well. So that's exactly right, to do that and look locally and see who you can partner up with and utilize the facility without having to invest and build yourself.
Yeah, great. Okay, so going back to a general question for all three of you, and this has been touched on a bit by each of you, I think, or at least a couple of you. So how do you as retailers and manufacturers deal with recyclability messaging and labeling when it's so different in every region of our country? And so how do you do that messaging for consumers? And we can just start maybe in the same order, if that's okay, Gail?
Sure. I think I mentioned in my last response, we have adopted the Sustainable Packaging Coalition's How to Recycle label as our method for communicating to consumers. Obviously, with a national, international at times branded food company, we can't customize the on-pack messaging for the local differences in recycling. So SPC, I think, has done the best job of finding the icons that are recognizable in terms of the chasing arrow icon, and they have different labels that they actually validate for our products. We pay a membership fee, and we have every label approved by them, and it basically says it's widely recycled. You need to check your local capabilities. It's not recyclable, or it's a store pickup. And so that we put that on every package now. We're probably 80+% there. And as we're going through label reform and updating labels, we're making sure that logo goes on every package. So whether the package is recyclable or not, or it's questionable depending on where you live, at least we tell you that on the package so that you're informed about what to do with it when you're done with it.
Thank you. Nell, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think ours really is about that front of house disposable to-go containers, and that has to be, again, customized by what the recyclers take. We have, as part of our toolkits for our on-site teams around waste, some guidance on how to put together messaging, but it's a bit more complicated than that. I think in most cases, a lot of our clients have brand standards. They don't want to have signage that doesn't meet their standards for how they want their buildings to look. So it's always done in collaboration with those clients. We have marketing. I think, honestly, the way that it's done in most cases is that the marketing team on site, if it's a large enough account to have a marketing team, works with the client and says, because it really is crafting that site-wide recycling and composting strategy rather than just us doing it alone, because it has to fit into a bigger strategy on how to reduce any non-recyclable materials going into those bins. So really it's that collaboration with the client, and they can pull pictures of the products they're using down from our ordering systems, and they craft them together. And we have some kits that make it easy to do that, but I think in most cases, the on-site teams are creating their own in order to ensure they're aligning with those client standards.
Great, thank you. And Christine, anything to add?
So in our stores in the U.S., we take back plastic film and bags, bread bags, dry cleaning bags, etc. We have bins located in the vestibules of our stores and communicate to customers there that we take that material back, and then we turn it into either benches and donate benches or composite decking, depending on location. As far as messaging, it's difficult because, in our retail world, we're always kind of fighting with marketing for space and voice, et cetera. It's like I always say, Earth Day is our yearly coming out party. we do a really good job on Earth Day about talking about what we do, and that's the best example of messaging and sharing. But I always think we can do a better job, so we're always trying to do that. But wherever we can help customers with maybe our bins outside the store, taking back commingled, bottles and cans, et cetera, and our bottle reverse vending machines and bottle bill states, et cetera. We try to do that. We're always looking at better programs.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I have a specific question for Nell, and then a couple general questions that I'll ask to all of you, and then before we close out. So Nell, we got a question from someone who, if they have a Sodexo operation on site, how can we start to coordinate the capture of uneaten cooked foods to be taken to the local food banks?
Yeah, so we have two main partners that we work with on those types of programs. And I'm not sure what type of account you are, if you're a hospital or you're a K-12 school, but our two main partners that can help work through liability, coordinate volunteers, and provide resources are Campus Kitchens and the Food Recovery Network. The Food Recovery Network has a program called Food Recovery Certified. You can actually get a facility certified that they're recovering all their unused and nutritious, delicious food that would have gone into landfill. So I would look into those options. Other than that, let's say you are a hospital and neither of those groups will really be a suitable fit. I would go and find the general manager, just go into the facility and say, I want to talk to the general manager. It's a cafeteria, for example. Get that woman or man's name and start a conversation. Tell them that Sodexo has a food recovery toolkit on our intranet that walks through any liability coverage, the checklist to make sure that food's handled properly, and provides information on how to talk to their clients. So whoever at that facility is actually the person that works with us to manage the food service on site. So we have all the items needed to make that happen on our intranet in our food recovery toolkit. So you can work through an external partner or you can work through the general manager on site.
Great, thank you. Okay, so a couple final questions for any of you that want to answer. Not each of you may have thoughts on this, but the first one goes to, since this is an international audience for this webinar, what cost-effective methods of reduction can be recommended for third world country or developing countries who would want to become involved in food waste reduction? And I think they were asking it in the context of, given we have our own infrastructure struggles here in the U.S. If you have any thoughts on what developing countries can do.
This is Gail. I'm happy to chime in on this a little bit. As the Food Waste Reduction Alliance got together and started really understanding the issue and the scope and magnitude of food waste, what we realized was the order of magnitude was equivalent whether you were a developed or developing nation, but the reasons were different. In places like Europe and the United States, the waste is a lot more happening at the consumer end, at the point of consumption, in terms of the pie of where the waste is being generated. But in more developing nations, the source is at the point of harvest and distribution to get to the people. And so what I would say is investing in preservation infrastructure like canning, smoking, the typical preservation techniques, freezing and refrigeration, and packaging is where we don't lose nearly as much in our distribution system in developed nations as those countries who are losing things more in the agricultural space. So using good packaging and preservation techniques will help get the food to the end consumers a lot better. So, but also thinking about, we didn't talk about circular economy at all today, but we also know that we're still trying to solve for those end-of-life issues around packaging. If we're developing infrastructure for developing nations, having that whole thought through, the whole circle thought through in that infrastructure development, I think is key to not perpetuating a problem that we're still trying to solve here in the U.S.
Yeah, and this is Nell. I think.
Oh, go ahead, Nell.
One thing I'd add there is the reason that, so considering the infrastructure challenges and some of the similar, I think, challenges with like impacting actual behavior at an account, we've chosen to focus on source reduction and feeding hungry people. And I think that's something that's accessible in almost any geography, despite infrastructure. So we, for example, operate K-12 schools in Northern Arizona where there is no recycling and no composting available at all. There's just not the infrastructure. So in those facilities, what we can control is source reduction. There's some simple things you can do when you're preparing food to reduce food waste, like collecting trim waste in clear bins and doing training and awareness with on-site teams. I think Gail, her examples are really good examples of how finding homes for a large amount of product is really this like problem-solving activity. There's not one solution. There's not one way to do it. It's about finding the right people to take it and the right way to collect it and working through all the kinks to make it the best possible solution for all parties. So I think that those types of solutions are the best places to start, is just say, what do we have a lot of? Where can it go? And who can take it? And just focus on those top two tiers and address those first, because you don't need infrastructure to do source reduction.
Excellent point. Christine, anything you want to add?
I think Gail and Nell said it better than I ever could.
Very good, very good. So
yeah,
we are at about time, so we're going to end the questions there. We really want to thank our three speakers for sharing their expertise and experiences today. We also want to thank all of you for joining this month's Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy and hope you continue to join us on future webinars. Please take a few minutes to complete the evaluation and give us feedback so that we can design informative webinars with compelling speakers in the future. We will post the slides and audio for this webinar soon. And with that, we conclude today's webinar. Thank you all very much.